Story 1. As I reviewed the footage from my night vision camera, I saw myself sleeping peacefully. Then, a shadowy figure leaned over me and whispered, "I told you not to watch this." John decided to spend the weekend camping in the middle of the creepy woods. He'd heard stories about the place, but never believed them. He thought it would be a good spot to clear his mind. The first night was quiet until he felt a cold, creepy hand on his arm. Startled, he shot up, but there was nothing there. His heart raced, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. The next day, John set up his night vision camera outside his tent. He wanted to see if any animals had come close or if his mind was playing tricks on him. He needed to know what had touched him in the middle of the night. The woods around him were dense and dark, the trees twisted and gnarled like they had a story to tell. The ground was covered with a thick layer of fallen leaves, and the air was cold and still. As the sun set, casting long shadows through the trees, John felt a sense of unease. The woods seemed to come alive with every creak and rustle. He built a small fire and sat close to it, trying to shake off the feeling of dread. The flames flickered, casting eerie shapes around him. The night was silent, except for the occasional hoot of an owl and the rustling of leaves in the wind. John crawled into his tent and zipped it shut, trying to calm his nerves. He hoped the camera would catch whatever had touched him. He lay there for hours, his mind racing with thoughts of what could be out there. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and he drifted off to sleep, unaware of the terror that awaited him. Morning came, and John woke up with the first light. He felt a sense of relief as the sunlight filtered through the trees. He grabbed the camera and eagerly reviewed the footage. At first, everything seemed normal. He saw himself sleeping, the fire dying down, and the quiet stillness of the woods. But then his heart stopped as he saw a shadowy figure appear on the screen. The figure was tall and faceless, a dark mass that seemed to absorb the light around it. It moved silently, gliding closer to his tent. John watched in horror as the figure leaned over him, its form becoming more defined. It whispered, "I told you not to watch this." And John could feel the chill of its words even through the screen. Suddenly, he heard a noise outside the tent. His blood ran cold as he realized the figure was still out there. He unzipped the tent slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. The woods were eerily silent. Then he saw it, the same dark figure standing a few feet away, watching him. John turned and ran, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The woods seemed to close in around him, the trees becoming a twisted maze. The figure followed, gliding effortlessly through the underbrush. No matter how fast he ran, it was always right behind him. He stumbled and fell, the figure looming over him. John screamed, his voice echoing through the trees. The last thing he saw was the figure reaching out, its cold hand touching his arm once more. His screams were swallowed by the silence of the woods, and then there was nothing but darkness. Story 2. The last man on Earth sat alone in a room. There was a knock on the door. Paul had been alone for years. The world had ended in a chaos, a virus turning people into zombies. He was one of the few who had survived. After months of running and hiding, he had found this island in the middle of the ocean. It was small, but it was safe. He hadn't seen another person, living or dead, in years. The island was his sanctuary. Palm trees lined the shore, and a dense forest covered the interior. At night, he would listen to the waves crashing against the rocks and the wind rustling through the leaves. It was peaceful, but also lonely. The silence was sometimes overwhelming, a constant reminder that he was truly alone. Paul spent his days fishing, gathering coconuts, and maintaining his small hut on the beach. He had grown used to the routine, the quiet life. He never thought he would miss the noise and bustle of the world, but he did. Sometimes he would talk to himself just to hear a human voice. One night, as he was lying in his hut, reading by the light of a lantern, he heard a noise that made his heart stop. It was a knock at the door. It was faint, but unmistakable. For a moment, he thought he was imagining it. He sat up, listening intently. The knock came again, a little louder this time. He froze, his mind racing. No one had been on this island for years. He had checked every inch of it when he first arrived. There shouldn't be anyone here. The knock sounded again, more insistent. He stood up slowly, grabbing his machete from under his bed. His heart was pounding in his chest as he approached the door. With a trembling hand, he reached for the handle, his mind screaming at him to stop. He took a deep breath and yanked the door open. There was no one there. He stepped outside, looking around. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the beach, but there was no sign of anyone. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves and the rustling of the palm trees. Paul's fear turned to confusion. Had he imagined it? Was he losing his mind after all this time alone? He closed the door and locked it, his thoughts a jumble of fear and doubt. He sat back down, the machete still in his hand, and tried to calm his racing heart. But the feeling of unease lingered, and he knew he wouldn't sleep that night. Paul couldn't shake the feeling of unease after the mysterious knock on his door. He spent the rest of the night wide awake, listening for any more sounds, but the island remained eerily silent. As dawn broke, he decided to investigate further. Leaving his machete behind, Paul ventured deeper into the island, towards the heart of the dense rainforest. The trees loomed overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist with every step he took. The air was thick with humidity, and the ground was soft beneath his feet. As he pushed through the undergrowth, Paul's mind raced. Who could have knocked on his door? Or was it another survivor, lost and looking for shelter? Or something else entirely? The thought sent a chill down his spine. After what felt like hours of walking, Paul stumbled upon a clearing in the forest. And there, standing before him, were hundreds of figures. They moved slowly, their tattered clothes hanging loosely from their emaciated bodies. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, and their eyes were clouded over. Paul's blood turned to ice as he realized what he was looking at. Zombies. They had found him. Somehow, they had found their way to his island sanctuary. His mind raced with fear and panic as the reality of his situation sank in. There was nowhere left to run. With trembling hands, Paul reached for his machete, knowing it was futile against so many. The zombies continued to shuffle closer, their low moans filling the air. He was surrounded, trapped in a nightmare he thought he had escaped long ago. As the first zombie reached out for him, Paul closed his eyes and let out a scream that echoed through the rainforest. The last thing he heard was the sound of tearing flesh and the guttural groans of the undead. And then there was silence. The island, once his sanctuary, had become his tomb. Story 3. The old rocking chair in the corner of my room started moving on its own. When I asked who was there, a cold voice replied, "Just waiting for you to join me." Tom lived alone in an old farmhouse in Iowa, surrounded by fields that stretched to the horizon. The house was a family heirloom, passed down through generations. It creaked and groaned with age. But lately, Tom had noticed more unsettling sounds. Every night, he would hear faint footsteps in the living room, even though he was sure he was alone. One evening, as Tom sat in his kitchen reading a book, he heard a soft thump from the living room. He ignored it at first, chalking it up to the house settling. But then he heard it again, louder this time. He walked to the living room, peering into the dimly lit space. The old rocking chair in the corner was moving slowly, creaking back and forth. Tom's heart raced. He had never seen the chair move on its own before. He stepped closer, the floorboards creaking under his feet. The air grew colder, and he could see his breath misting in front of him. He stood frozen, staring at the chair, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He whispered, "Who's there?" hoping for no answer. But then, a cold voice replied, "Just waiting for you to join me." Tom stumbled back, his mind racing. He had always heard stories about haunted houses, but he never believed them. Now, he was living in one. The farmhouse felt different, sinister. The once comforting home now felt like a trap. Tom decided he couldn't ignore the signs any longer. He needed to find out what was happening. He spent the next day researching the house's history, hoping to uncover any clues. He found old records and newspaper clippings, discovering that the farmhouse had a dark past. A previous owner had mysteriously disappeared, and some locals believed the house was cursed. As night fell, Tom prepared himself for whatever might come. He set up an old tape recorder in the living room and sat in the dark, waiting. The silence was deafening. Every creak and groan of the house amplified in the quiet. Tom felt a chill in the air as the temperature dropped and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He knew something was coming. The old rocking chair in the corner of my room started moving on its own. When I asked who was there, a cold voice replied, "Just waiting for you to join me." As Tom sat in the dark, the air grew colder, and an oppressive silence filled the room. The old rocking chair began to move again, its creaking echoing through the house. Tom's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm, watching the chair sway back and forth. Suddenly, the tape recorder clicked on, and a static hiss filled the room. Through the static, Tom could hear faint whispers, unintelligible but undeniably present. He strained to make out the words, his pulse quickening with each passing second. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, until a cold, familiar voice emerged. "Join me," it said, chilling Tom to his core. The temperature in the room plummeted, and Tom's breath formed visible clouds in the air. He felt a presence behind him, an icy breath on his neck. He turned slowly, his eyes widening in terror. Standing in the doorway was a tall, faceless figure, its form shrouded in darkness. The figure's presence was overwhelming, filling Tom with a sense of dread he had never known. Tom tried to move, but his legs felt like lead. The figure advanced, each step slow and deliberate, as if savoring his fear. The whispers from the tape recorder grew louder, overlapping with the figure's movements. "Join me," the voice repeated, echoing through Tom's mind. Desperation took hold, and Tom stumbled backward, his eyes never leaving the faceless entity. He reached for the door, hoping to escape, but the figure was faster. It closed the distance in an instant, its cold hand wrapping around Tom's wrist. The touch was like ice, searing into his skin. "Let me go!" Tom screamed, struggling to break free. The figure's grip tightened, and Tom's vision began to blur. He could feel his strength draining away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of despair. The whispers grew deafening, drowning out his thoughts, his fear, his will to fight. As Tom's consciousness faded, the last thing he heard was the figure's chilling whisper, "Just waiting for you to join me." His scream echoed through the empty farmhouse, a final, desperate plea that was swallowed by the darkness. The next morning, the farmhouse was silent, the rocking chair still. The tape recorder lay on the floor, its tape unwound and tangled. Tom was nowhere to be found, vanished without a trace. The house stood empty once more, but the whispers lingered, waiting for the next soul to wander into their trap. Story 4. I found an old mirror buried in the attic and decided to clean it up. When I looked into it, my reflection was smiling, but I wasn't. Wendy had always been intrigued by the attic in their newly inherited Victorian home. The rest of the house exuded a cozy warmth with its oak-paneled walls and vintage wallpaper, but the attic seemed to exist in a world of its own, a world of shadows and secrets. On a rainy Saturday afternoon, Wendy decided to explore the attic, armed with a flashlight and a sense of adventure. The attic was a labyrinth of forgotten treasures, dusty trunks, cobwebbed furniture, and boxes filled with yellowing letters and photographs from generations past. The air was thick with the scent of age and neglect, and every step echoed eerily against the wooden floorboards. As Wendy ventured deeper into the attic's maze, she noticed a corner obscured by a tattered sheet. With cautious curiosity, she approached and pulled back the cloth, revealing an ornate mirror hidden beneath layers of dust. The mirror, framed in mahogany with intricate carvings of mythical creatures, seemed out of place among the attic's forgotten relics. Intrigued by its mysterious allure, Wendy decided to clean the mirror. She rummaged through an old chest and found a cloth, gently wiping away years of neglect. As the grime dissolved, the mirror began to reflect the dim attic light in a mesmerizing way, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. When Wendy finally stood before the polished mirror, she hesitated for a moment, studying her own reflection. The mirror seemed to hold a peculiar depth, as though it could reveal more than just her physical appearance. As she leaned closer, her breath fogging the glass, she saw her reflection smile, a subtle, unnerving grin that sent a shiver down her spine. Startled, Wendy stepped back, her heart racing. She glanced around the attic, suddenly feeling the weight of its silence and the age-old secrets it harbored. The attic seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her next move. She quickly retreated from the mirror, leaving it gleaming in the dim light, its surface now clear and reflective. As Wendy descended the attic stairs, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The smile in the mirror haunted her thoughts, its implications lingering in her mind like a riddle begging to be solved. What had she glimpsed in that ancient glass? And why did it seem to smile back at her in a way that was both familiar and unsettling? That night, as the house settled into an eerie silence, Wendy lay awake in bed, her thoughts drifting back to the attic. She tossed and turned, the memory of the mirror's grin haunting her like a persistent specter. The faint patter of rain against the window added to the oppressive atmosphere, casting elongated shadows across the room. Unable to resist the pull of curiosity, Wendy slipped out of bed and tiptoed down the hallway, the floorboards creaking softly beneath her feet. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, bathing the hallway in a silvery glow. She paused at the foot of the attic stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. With trembling hands, Wendy ascended the stairs once more, the faint light from her flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The attic door loomed before her, its handle cold to the touch, as she pushed it open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. Entering the attic, Wendy felt a chill settle over her. The mirror stood in the corner where she had left it, its surface now reflecting only darkness. She approached cautiously, her footsteps echoing in the silence. As she drew nearer, a sense of dread washed over her like a cold wave. Suddenly, a movement caught Wendy's eye, a flicker of movement in the mirror's glass. She gasped as she saw her reflection once again, but this time, it was different. The smile that greeted her was no longer subtle or familiar. It was wide and malevolent, revealing rows of gleaming teeth that seemed to glint in the dim light. "I've been waiting," a voice whispered from within the mirror, sending shivers down Wendy's spine. She staggered back, her pulse racing with fear. The mirror seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly energy, its frame crackling with an unseen power. In a panic, Wendy turned to flee from the attic, but her foot caught on a loose floorboard, sending her sprawling to the ground. As she struggled to rise, she glanced back at the mirror, horror coursing through her veins. Her reflection had disappeared, replaced by a swirling vortex of darkness. Within its depths, Wendy glimpsed a nightmarish landscape, a realm of twisted shadows and haunting whispers. Desperate and terrified, she screamed for help, but her voice seemed to vanish into the abyss. The last thing Wendy saw before everything went black was the mirror's grin, its malevolent visage etched into her mind like a scar. Darkness enveloped her, and the attic echoed with her agonized cries. Story 5. I always thought the whispers from the closet were just my imagination until they started calling my name. Now every night I hear them closer and closer. I always thought the whispers from the closet were just my imagination until they started calling my name. Now every night I hear them closer and closer. Jake had lived in the old farmhouse for a few months, hoping to find peace and quiet away from the city. The house was nestled in a remote area, surrounded by dense woods. It was perfect for solitude, or so he thought. At first, everything seemed normal, but then Jake started hearing strange noises at night. The whispers from the closet began softly, almost too faint to notice. He dismissed them as the wind or his imagination playing tricks on him. But night after night, the whispers grew louder and more persistent. The farmhouse was old, with creaky wooden floors and drafty windows. During the day, it had a rustic charm, but at night, it transformed into something sinister. Shadows danced on the walls and the wind howled through the trees, making the whole place feel alive with secrets. Jake's bedroom was on the second floor, and the closet was a large, imposing structure in the corner. He always kept it closed, but each morning, he found it slightly ajar. It was as if someone, or something, was opening it while he slept. One night, unable to sleep, Jake decided to investigate. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the closet. The whispers were faint but unmistakable, like hushed voices having a conversation just out of earshot. He strained to make out the words, but they were too distorted, too eerie. With a deep breath, Jake approached the closet, his heart pounding in his chest. He opened the door slowly, half expecting something to leap out at him, but it was empty, just his clothes, hanging silently. He sighed in relief, feeling foolish for being scared. But the next night, the whispers returned, louder and more distinct. And this time, they were calling his name. Jake. Jake. The sound sent shivers down his spine. He tried to block it out, covering his ears with his pillow, but the voices persisted, relentless and eerie. Desperate for answers, Jake began recording the sounds with his phone. When he played back the recordings, the whispers were clear and unmistakable, sending chills through him. He knew then that something was very wrong. The voices were real, and they were getting closer each night. Jake tried to rationalize it, telling himself it was just his mind playing tricks. But deep down, he knew there was something more sinister at play. The farmhouse held dark secrets, and whatever was in the closet wanted him to know it. The night after he recorded the whispers, Jake felt a sense of dread he couldn't shake. The air in the farmhouse was heavy and cold, as if a storm was brewing inside the walls. He went to bed early, hoping sleep would come quickly, but the whispers began it almost immediately. Jake, Jake. This time they were louder and clearer, and he could make out the malice in their tone. Fear gripped him, but he forced himself to get up and confront whatever was in the closet. He grabbed a flashlight, the beam trembling in his shaky hand, and approached the door. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice wavering. The whispers stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to stretch forever. He reached for the handle, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. Slowly, he opened the closet door, shining the flashlight inside. At first, it seemed empty, just like before. But then he noticed something strange. The clothes weren't hanging the way they should. They were twisted and contorted, as if something had been moving among them. He stepped closer, pushing the clothes aside, and that's when he saw of it. A dark figure crouched in the corner, barely visible, but undeniably there. Before he could react, the figure lunged at him, knocking him to the floor. The flashlight rolled away, casting wild, flickering shadows around the room. Jake scrambled to get up, but the figure was on him, pinning him down with an inhuman strength. The whispers were now a cacophony of voices, all calling his name, all filled with anger and malice. "I told you not to look," a cold voice hissed in his ear. Jake tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure's face was close to his, but it was featureless, just a dark, terrifying void. He felt a cold, clammy hand grip his throat, squeezing the life out of him. His vision blurred, and he knew he was about to die. As the darkness closed in, he heard the figure's final, chilling words. "Now, you'll join us forever." The next morning, the farmhouse was silent and still. The closet door was wide open, and Jake was gone. All that remained was the sound of faint whispers, echoing through the empty rooms, waiting for their next victim.